Good morning and welcome to How Do I with Quality Sewing and Vacuum. I'm Robin Coffin and today we're going to talk about buttonholes. So before we talk about the buttonholes, let's talk about buttons. Rule of thumb is take the button, you know how big it is, usually from the package, or you can measure it. You add 1/8 of an inch and that's how big your buttonhole should be. But does that always work? It doesn't. So here, I think you can see this. I've got 3 buttons. These are all 5/8 inch buttons. This one's very thin. This one's thin, but has a shank. And this one is very domed. So if you make the same size buttonhole for all of these, this one's probably not going to fit, or this one's going to be very sloppy. So to remedy that, take a piece of ribbon, wrap it around the button. This gives you the circumference of the button. Slip that off. You can mark it with a pin if you want. I just hold it because I know right where my thumb was. And then you can measure that on your little seam gauge to get your size. So you take that, add 1/8 of an inch, and that's how big your buttonhole needs to be. So I've got these 3. Again, these are 3/4 inch buttons. And because of the different thicknesses and different types of buttons, they would need different buttonhole sizes. I did the math earlier, so I don't have to measure each and every one of them for you. So this one, I would recommend a 3/4 inch buttonhole. That should give you just a little bit of ease to put it through without it being sloppy. This one with the shank, even though it's about the same thickness as this button, it needs a little bit more wiggle room. So this one's going to need about 1 inch. And this little chubby guy is going to need about 1 1/8 inches, maybe 1.25 inches, depending on how easy you want it to fit through. If it was for a child, I'd probably go 1.25 inches just to make it that much easier. For these little 3/4 inch guys, the little flat one is going to be about 1 inch. The thick one is going to be about 1 1/8 inches. And then this one is domed, not quite as much as the smaller button was, but it's going to need about 1.25 inches. So you can see these 2 are going to require about the same size buttonhole. But if you rely on just measuring the button and adding that 1/8 inch, you would never guess that. So once you know how big you need to make your buttonhole, then you need to decide which type you're going to use. And there are lots of different kinds. Well, there's 4 basic different kinds of buttonholes. So the first one is just your standard regular buttonhole. This is what you'll find on most ready-wear, and it's on most sewing machines. Even the most basic mechanical machines will typically have at least 1 buttonhole, and it'll be this style. This is best for medium to heavyweight fabrics, and it can be orientated either horizontal or vertically depending on your application. The next one is a no bar tack buttonhole. As you'll see, this is rounded on both ends. Again, this is going to be used for more medium weight fabrics or decorative. And a lot of times you'll see this on children's clothing. Then we have a keyhole buttonhole. This is good for heavyweight fabrics or those big buttons with a shank because it gives more clearance for that. And the shank will actually settle into that keyhole when it's buttoned. These almost always are horizontal. You'll see those on jeans and heavy jackets, those kinds of things. And finally, we have a top bar tack. Again, this one is just round on one end, bar tack on the other, typically orientated this way so that the bar tack is holding the strain of the button pulling against it. From there, let's slide over here to the machine. This is a very basic mechanical machine, has a 4-step buttonhole, and most 4-step buttonholes are going to look similar to this. Before we start, we're going to mark how big we want our buttonhole. So I'm going to grab my little button, and I'm just going to make a little mark on my fabric on either side of it. Just not touching it. And that will indicate to me then where to start and stop my buttonhole. I'm going to put the foot on the machine. You can just let this thread be up and trim it later. I like to tuck it under the foot before I even begin. So I have all my threads contained and out of the way. You'll want to lower your tension to about 3. That'll give a nice satin stitch on top and let the stitches tuck underneath. On this machine, we're going to make several sets. So we're going to start with number 1, the first side of the buttonhole. We're going to put the stitch length at the buttonhole setting, and we're going to put our stitch width somewhere between 4 and 5. If you want a little bit wider, of course, you can go all the way to the 5, a little narrower to the 4, and that's the overall width of the buttonhole. I'm going to put my fabric in, bring the buttonhole foot all the way to the front, and then I always put it back just maybe 1/8 of an inch, just to give you that little bit of wiggle room when you're doing. Center your dots in the middle and start stitching. So we're going to stitch forward until we get to our pink dot. A couple more stitches. And then we're going to change. Here it's step 2. That's going to bar tack. Let it go about 6 or 8 stitches. Step 3, all the way back. And slow down as I know I'm getting close, so I can see my pink dot again. And then back to the center one, which is now step 4. Bar tack at the other, 6 or 8 stitches. Give it a couple more, and we're finished. So even on the most basic machine, you can get a beautiful buttonhole. If you wanted your stitches a little closer together, you could turn it a little more toward the 0. You want them spaced a little bit more apart toward the 1. If you look at ready wear, this is about the density, and that's about in the middle that ready wear is. Some people like to go over their buttonholes twice, or they like to make this very dense. But in reality, all that's doing is weakening the edge of your fabric. This is enough to keep it from fraying without weakening that and having the entire buttonhole pull away from the fabric. The other most common buttonhole type you'll have are automatic or one-step buttonholes. So if we slide over to this machine, you'll see it has a number of different styles of buttonholes. We're just going to do this number 59, the standard buttonhole. This time, though, instead of having to mark our fabric, we're going to put our buttonhole here in the foot. Because this one is very flat, we know that this standard is going to work. On some of those others, as we looked at, we'd have to open it up just a little bit. So put it in there nice and snug, but not overly tight. Snap our foot on. This time, we're going to go down. And I don't know why I do it this way, but on this one, I like to pull my thread up. On that one, I like to leave it underneath. This one, the only mark you would need to know is where you're going to start your button, where you want your buttonhole to start. Well, actually, this one goes backwards first, so we'll just pretend we have our placket all set and we're going to start there. So this one is more automatic. I did lower my tension to 3, and it will set all of the other settings for us. We're going to come underneath. I'm going to put that mark. I don't know if you can see, Carrie, there are red marks here. So I'm going to center that to the red marks, both vertically and horizontally there. And thread it. Oh, I forgot one step, but my machine told me, it beeped at me and let me know I had an error. This one has a lever. You see that lever? That indicates to the buttonhole foot how big to make that buttonhole. Now we're ready to go. So step on the foot pedal, gives us 1 bar tack stitch, and then this one actually stitches straight, stitches back, straight stitches forward, and then it's going to do the zigzag bar tack back. When it reaches the end, it's going to automatically stitch forward again, bar tack, stitch back, and then bar tack the other end. And it's completed. And then the foot springs back, so it's all ready to do the next buttonhole, exactly the same size. I'm just going to do one more right next to it. I didn't put a pink mark on this one, but I think we can get it pretty much lined up, and you'll be able to see how perfect they are side by side. back, again forward, does its bar tack. Oh, nope, I got ahead of myself. Does the zigzag back, jumps across to the other side, straight forward. Now it'll do the bar tack and zigzag back. Not every machine is going to stitch in this exact order, but on an automatic buttonhole, it will do the full buttonhole. All you have to do is step on the pedal and stitch until the machine stops. And you can see, I started this one a little higher, but you can see they are the same size. So once you have your buttonholes cut, but once you have them stitched, then you get to cut them. There's lots of different ways you can do the cutting. Bring my little basket out. Of course, you can use a small scissor. You can use your trusty seam ripper. Or there are special tools made just for buttonhole cutting. If you're using either the scissors or the seam ripper, I highly recommend you take a straight pin and put it just inside the bar tack on either end. That way, if you slip, you're not going all the way through your buttonhole. Remember, years ago, I thought, oh, I don't need to know that. I do that. I can get this finished. I can stop, until I did a gift and went right on through it. So then you're going to start at the center, and you're just going to go right up to that pin. Again, start at the center, go the other way, right up to that pin. And it's always good to err just on the side of a little bit short, because you can always clip a little bit more if you need to. And then I'm going to pop my button out of here and just give it a little test. So that slides through nice. The other way to do them with a buttonhole cutter is you always are going to have some kind of a mat. It can be your regular rotary cutter mat. Some sets come with a little mat. Some come with a little wooden block. Set I have open here. I'm not sure if it didn't come with one or if I've just misplaced it, but this is mine from home. And it's just a little wedge blade. The other tool is an eyelet punch, or for the keyhole buttonholes, you can cut that little keyhole part out with this. I'm going to lay my buttonhole here, and I'm just going to place the blade between and give it a little tap. And on the other side and the other end. I probably have my hand in the way so you can't see that. And that should have cut my buttonhole through. Oh, I need a little bit more. All right, so now we're all the way through. Now to reinforce your buttonhole, you do have a little, you have your edges there. It's a good idea, or I like to use either fray check or fray block, and you're going to apply it from the back. And that's just going to help keep it from fraying, keep those threads from coming loose. And if you just happen to maybe snip one thread, this is going to keep that from letting go also. So just a little bead down each side. I'd angle my hand a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing here. Down and back. And then you're just going to set that aside and let that dry. So those are the different types of buttonholes, of one-step, or a four-step, a one-step or automatic, how to cut it. But there's lots more to share with that, with the buttonholes. I'm going to put my pins away, set these aside. If you were to make your buttonholes just on a single layer of fabric, or even 2 layers of fabric, it's probably not going to be very successful. It's probably going to bunch and gather, and that's not what you want for a nice completed project. On these, because these are just samples to show you, I just used a nice tearaway stabilizer on those, and you can see how nice and flat those lay. Aren't those great big craft buttonholes? So Floriani tearaway medium is a great weight for using with these kinds of projects. This is going to be a tote bag, And I didn't want anything inside, so I didn't use interfacing like I would on a blouse or a garment. Instead, I just put the tearaway here, and when it's all done, it will very cleanly, as its name indicates, tear away and be removed. So we could go all the way around. This, so you've got either tearaway stabilizer or your interfacing. If you have a fabric that you are afraid is going to be distorted, you might have, and it's a garment, you have your interfacing in it, but you could also layer it with tearaway stabilizer just to give it that extra support when you're stitching. Some other ideas that I've got here. Well, let's hold that for just a minute. When you're doing garments, how do you know if the buttonhole should be horizontal or vertical? Typically, horizontal buttonholes are going to be used for jackets, for pants, for children's clothing, and about the only time they're going to be vertical are going to be on men's shirts that have a stitch placket, or on fine blouses that for women's wear. Your patterns will tell you the size of button, and it's very important that you stay within an 1/8 inch of that. If you just change the size by much more than that, it's just not going to look the way it was intended to begin with. And you want to do the button placement or the buttonhole placement pretty much where it says on the pattern. The exception might be some body types might need a more strategic button across the bust line. So if that's the case, you would want to put the garment on before you did your buttons and mark that bust line. Make sure you put a button there so you don't have gaping. Some of the other things I've got here, let me set this one aside. We've got a little shirt here, and again, these are vertical buttonholes because it's a child's shirt, and that's not going to get a lot of pull. You're not going to have to worry about that unbuttoning itself. A little girl's dress. And if you're in doubt, look at your ready-wear in your closet and see how they orientated those buttonholes. But don't need to use your buttonholes just to keep your clothes on and keep your clothes closed. There's lots of other things you can use buttonholes for. So as I showed you on this one, I'm going to pull a couple more off, and I'm just going to tear this piece off. This, when it's finished, is going to be a little tote bag. So I will cut the buttonholes once I've done my seams, and then I have ribbon that will run in and out of the buttonholes around, and then that will gather the top, so I'll have a little shopping bag. Here I've got the start of a pillow top, and again, I did buttonholes and wove the ribbon in and out. So this is going to just be a pillow top, actually, for one of my grandchildren. Again, on my little notebook cover, I've got my ribbon here to keep my place in my book. And I've got 2 buttonholes on the back of it. The ribbon runs through that, and that's how that stays in place, so I don't lose it. And finally, I've got this little calendar that a friend gave me years ago. So the different months button here, and then the days of the week are Velcroed on. So when it comes to buttonholes, they're just not for clothing. Think outside the box. Maybe you've got your gardening gloves and you can never find them. Maybe you put a buttonhole on the cuff of each one, and you can hang them on a hook on your garden cart that way, and then you know where they are when you need them. Or in the kitchen, you could put a buttonhole in the corner of your towel to hang it up. So think outside the box, and with a little bit of practice, you can have wonderful buttonholes at every try.